So I was going to write notes. I was going to write some notes to help guide me through the process of answering these tough interview-like questions. I could see these questions being, asked in an interview for a job. Uh, but I decided not to because this isn't an interview. This is an authentic reflection and an authentic uh, exhibition of understanding of some of these concepts that we've talked about. And for me to write notes would, uh, you know, probably result in me using falling back on them and using them as some type of script. And I don't want to do that because I think that hinders um, the process in some way. So let's get into it. The purpose of school, uh, it's to prepare our students for what lies ahead. Uh, it's the building that should have a culture of risk taking and inclusivity and one that makes that treats learning as this beautiful process of failures and accomplishments, each one equally held to equally laudable. Laudable, is that the right word? Let me look this shit up real quick. Hold on. Laudable. Pretty sure. Yeah, I got it. Sometimes I just use words I shouldn't be using because. Anyways, what was I saying? I was just describing the purpose of the school. God, if this was an interview. Maybe I should treat these as interviews. I think I just answered that, the first one. So, given my above answer, what's the teacher's role in the classroom? So I mentioned that the school should have this culture of inclusivity, a building that facilitates critical thinking and holds both successes and failures within the learning process as laudable. And but the teacher actually makes this happen. The teachers. But how? Like, what is the role? What does the teacher do? Not necessarily do, but how is the teacher's role make the building what it is? Well, for one, the teacher's there for the students, first and foremost. And that's an obvious observation, I think. Why teach if you're not there for the students? But going off of that, I mentioned something about critical thinking, and this is something I mentioned this morning as well, that critical thinking can only go so far if you do not extend it to students gaining critical thinking skills so that they can become agents of social change, so that they can use their critical thinking skills to become empowered. Then critical thinking alone is just not sufficient. It's just not. And that's part of the role of the teacher, is to facilitate a classroom environment such that the students can use these skills of abstraction and analysis and and mathematical reasoning that's grounded on logic, and in order to critically analyze the world around them and then to make appropriate decisions. That's part of the role of the teacher. And within that role, the teacher must acknowledge that acknowledge and adopt the philosophy that it is not the teacher who always does the teaching. In fact, I know that I will do more learning from the students than they will from me. If that, did I juxtapose that? Yeah. The teacher is the learner. I know Paulo said something about that. I can't. I wish I could pull up quotes on top of my head, but I don't memorize them. So, what's another role of a teacher? Another role. I mentioned this morning about the teacher cultivating learners such that they can become engaged members of our democratic society. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, that means nothing if you don't know what that means. And to a certain extent, I don't know what that means, because the democratic society has always benefited my position, my passive, static position of the society itself. As long as I merely exist within the society itself, I will contribute to a white supremacist, hegemonic, democratic society. Now, that is part of the role of the teacher, to understand that, especially, and this goes to the next question, it's like a caveat, but to understand that one's identity, especially when one is white, male, and heterosexual, and able-bodied, that if one just recognizes one's identity as neutral in relation to the democratic society, then you are not actually, I don't think that one would be actually accomplishing any goals of teaching students to become engaged members of democratic society. Because if you are not an engaged member of society yourself, meaning questioning norms, questioning systems of power, campaigning, doing what you think is socially just, then how could you teach your students to do that? But is that implying that one must be engaged in political activism prior to teaching in order to understand how to do it in the first place? No, that's not the case at all. This is interesting. It's a good question. So, what influence does a teacher's identity have on their pedagogical practices? I can really just think about my identity, that I've analyzed it quite deeply over the past 3.5 weeks, as I'm still writing this autoethnography. And there's just so many things, so many questions that I just can't answer within the context of how my identity's been formed. And if I can't answer certain questions about myself, about my being, then does that imply that I will not be a good teacher if one does not fully understand and can completely unpack, to use that often used word in like sociology, and one cannot fully unpack one's identity, then can one be a good teacher? And a good teacher, what is good? Well, good is a teacher that can enact and that does embody tenets of CRP, critical pedagogy. I don't know. What are the implications of teachers that don't know their identity? I think maybe I'm giving myself too hard of a time. Because even before this class, I've done nothing but be hyper analytical about myself. Not just like my actions in a very surface level reactionary type of analysis, but within the deeper context of like social structures and power dynamics, and what it means to be, a white man, a straight white man, in society, in this society specifically. But yet, how does my identity affect my teaching practice? I just think that what has shaped my identity is my biographical combination of biographical and cultural understandings and interpretations of self shape my identity, and therefore my identity will come to the surface as a teacher, because it must. One cannot separate oneself, one's true being, from the profession of teacher, because one must be vulnerable, learn how to share oneself with the students if one is to become a good teacher. So without truly knowing one's identity, you can't do that? Is that what we're implying? No, because a teacher, that I could be forthcoming and be like, hey, I don't really understand some of this myself. That's all I got for that one. Were your answers to these questions ever different? If not, why haven't they changed? No. They haven't changed. Well, mostly because like all of the stuff that we've been learning, I've already not learned it. I haven't, because if I have completely learned it deeply, like I have mathematics, then I would be able to articulate myself in a more precise, succinct, and coherent manner. I think it would be helpful if my learning didn't happen within this like autodidactic, like self-learning type of environment, as opposed to an environment where the learning is monitored and evaluated and pushed, as opposed to just reading a bunch of things and having conversation with friends and in arguments. But that's actually equally as efficient for learning, I think. So I guess to go back, to digress, the answers to these questions, no, they're the same now and they were the same then. Although critical pedagogy never really, it's always been, I guess perhaps I have learned it through reading Freire. But in a general sense, my answers have remained the same. Because of my willingness and my previous actions taken to learn about systems of oppression, about learning about education as liberation, about my identity and the implications, and how whiteness maintains white supremacy, or because I've taken great efforts to learn about this. I think that is reason for me that I think that's why my answers remain the same. The thing is, I could read many more books, but I think, was it Heidegger? I don't remember which philosopher, but until I put this into practice, I think it means nothing. It's informative, but I have to put this into practice. I have to. I must. Or we're just spinning our wheels, our theoretical wheels. And it's imperative that these answers are put into practice. Because I know that through a radical pedagogy, lives can be changed, including my own. And that not only will the students, but I will gain a better understanding of self through practice. But why else were these answers the same? That's all I got. I'm fucking tired. It's for some reason, 80 degrees in this upstairs apartment, and then all night it stays at 85 degrees. You can't sleep. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Oh, no, I won't. Well, for the last question, my answers remain the same. I suggested that. Oh, I know this already. I don't. The thing is I know that I'm done. It's quite taxing to try to pull apart these ideas. Just kind of spinning. Can't grab them. They're just all discombobulated. Maybe notes would have been a good idea.